So I think just talking about vocation is a really exciting thing to do, because it's that bit of faith where the first bit of faith is to have that encounter with the Lord and to experience the change in life that comes from that, and our vocation really follows on from that, and it's our response to that encounter with God in whatever way that is. And where do you say the vocation starts from? Well, it starts straight away if you really think about it, in a very unthought out way, just the way that we respond to God's call to us, the way that God speaks to us. It changes the way that we pray, probably, starts to change our behaviour, changes our relationships or the way that we relate. May not change the people, but it changes maybe the way that we relate, and just connections with the way that we see things, the way that we see the world. And then you've got more transformative things like, as we start to lead the Christian life more, we realise things like, our weaknesses are our strengths, for instance. And so we can start to see and understand our world and how I react to that in a very different way. And really that's all part of our response, even though it might not be conscious. So it's an amazing journey, really, and part of it, I suppose, is to make it more conscious. But at the same time, God, if you like, we allow God to unfold our life in front of us, which is a wonderful feeling. It's a great joy to take your hands off the wheels, to stop trying to direct life and to make things happen, and to just allow God to work through you in His own time. I thought I'd start with Matty asked for some nuggets in this talk. I thought, I don't know what that means. And I thought, well, I'm not sure I've got nuggets, but I know someone who has. And a lot of you may have heard this, but I just thought it might be worth, right at the start of this series of talks on vocation, is just listening to John Henry Newman, the Blessed John Henry Newman. Sorry?
Saint.
Is it Saint? Sorry, Saint John Henry Newman, and what he had to say on it, taken from the Worth School book, Brand book. God has created me to do some definite service. He has committed some work to me which He has not committed to another. I have my mission. I may never know it in this life, but I shall know it in the next. I have a part in this great work. I am a link in a chain, a bond of connection between persons. He has not created me for nothing. I shall do good. I shall do His work. I shall be an angel of peace, a preacher of truth in my own place, even while not intending it, if I do but just keep His commandments and serve Him in my calling. Therefore, I will trust in Him. Whatever I am, wherever I am, I can never be thrown away. If I am in sickness, my sickness can serve Him. In perplexity, my perplexity may serve Him. He does nothing in vain. He knows what He is about. I do not ask to see. I do not ask to know. I ask simply to be used. So great words there, which really spell out in in a sense, what that whole sense of vocation is and how I might experience that and understand that in my life. So I think just on my own reflection, the first thing I'd say is a big don't worry about reflection. I've went through a stage where I was talking to quite a few different people who are obviously very worried about the sense of vocation. You know, they got to the age of, I don't know, 25 or something, and nothing had happened, or they couldn't, God wasn't calling them, and panic sort of creeping in, really. And I would say, don't panic, don't worry. Reflect on it, yes, and pray, yes, but trust in the process of vocation. Trust in, as I said right at the beginning, that encounter and things happening at the right time. I was thinking, if you think about your life, and life really is about a growing in awareness in many ways. You know, if you think of your earliest memory, I don't know when that would be. Mine was, I think, when I was about 4, on the cusp of being 5. But you know, life went on for 4.5 years before that, and I wasn't aware. No problem in that. It's just the way it was. I wasn't ready. I don't know. Some people are aware a bit younger than that. It doesn't matter. And then going through life is a formation. You know, in your childhood, you don't know things. You're told things. You're taught things, and you pick things up, and slowly you begin to read life in a way, and you begin to relate to things and form relationships with people, with things, with other processes. But it all takes time, and part of that is making mistakes as well. Nobody becomes a full human being without making a mistake. It's part of the process of getting things wrong and learning from that. So we shouldn't be surprised when that happens. We should just look on it as this is all part of it. I mean, the thing is to try and learn from life as you go on, not just keep repeating the same mistakes over and over again. I think when we do that, we miss our vocation, really, our sense of vocation, because we're not engaging with life. And to respond to a vocation is to engage with life, because God comes to us through life. I think when I was at Oxford doing my training there in Scripture, they said, when I was doing Old Testament, that in the Jewish tradition, the critical age where you come of age is 30. It's not 21, not 25, 30, which is quite old, really. So, you know, I remember in the school talking to young teachers, and they, needed to be a head of department by the time they were 30, otherwise, they weren't really achieving, they weren't getting there. That's being competitive about life. That's not how vocation works. Vocation happens in its right time, when we're ready. And if you think about it, even Jesus didn't start his ministry until he was 30. One of the things that always struck me when I was learning to meditate, somebody saying that to find yourself, you really have to lose yourself. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. I don't think it's a scriptural thing, but it's there is a process whereby you come to that, and there is a sense of I think we do find ourselves in life at certain stages, and whether we were lost before that, that's a way of interpreting it. but it's just the way that we had to go. So I think my big sort of advice would be is don't panic. Everything happens in God's time. It doesn't happen in our time. And we know it's happening because God gently starts knocking at the door. And I love the story of Jonah. It's great. Right at the start, the word of God came to Jonah. Up, go to Nineveh, the great city, and preach against it, because I have come to know of its wickedness. So Jonah decided to flee from the presence of God and go to Tarshish. He went down to Joppa, found a ship bound for Tarshish, and paid for the fare. He then boarded it to go with them to Tarshish, far away from the presence of the Lord. So, gets it spectacularly wrong. We all know what happens next. The storm blows up and he gets thrown overboard because he's going against God's will. Whale swallows him, spits him up on the beach, and starts again. God calls again. And this time he listens and he goes to Nineveh and he preaches, and the people listen to him, and he's amazed. I think vocation is a lot like that. It takes us a bit of time to actually trust and to find out what is the call of God and how God is calling us. I think He calls us all in different ways, so we have to learn that. And part of life is tuning into that. And you're bound to get it wrong the first couple of times, or to kind of misfire on that. So, and I just thought I'd try and reflect on my own story with those sort of listening, not listening sort of thing, and how it's affected my life and the way I've responded, for better or worse. So I'm not going to go through my whole life story because it'll just go on forever. So, but just to set the setting, I was brought up as a Catholic, and my mother went to prep school, Catholic prep school, and then when I left school at 18, I joined the Royal Marines, something you know, and I stopped practicing. And the only reason I did that was because my elder brother, who I idolised a bit, stopped practicing, and I thought, well, Paul knows what he's talking about, so I'll just follow him. And that was about the sum of my thinking about it. And then I just got on with my life, trying to just follow people who I thought had sussed it and knew what they were doing, and copy them. And I was in the Marines for 4 years. It didn't really work. I enjoyed it, but I sort of came out after 4 years. I moved into the wine trade in London, just a spur of the moment thing, and I was in that for about 6 or 7 years. And if I look back on it, the last couple of years, there was a dissatisfaction there was an emptiness within me, and I knew that I should really move. And I did actually have a sense that I ought to do something about faith, that I gave up on that far too easily, and I ought to re-engage. But it seemed so long ago that it happened, that it all became a bit too much, and I ignored it, a bit like Jonah. And the next thing I knew is what I would say, God gave me a kick, and rather than the gentle nudge, because I lost my job working for the Wine and Spirit Company, rather spectacularly. I crashed the car. I was drinking and driving, fell asleep at the wheel, crashed the car, luckily walked away from it, and lost my job because I couldn't do my job anymore. Was devastated. But when it's looking back on it, I thought, oh, actually that's a real blessing, because I should have moved 2 years ago and I just didn't. And that happened when I was 30. So I just remembered that the other day. So what I do next, I thought, well, I had a flat living in southeast London, sold that, and I thought I'd do some travelling for a year and then come back and get on where I left off, sort of thing. So I got a around the world ticket and started travelling, and on my own. And the thing about being on your own is you start to think about things and reflect on things. And I started thinking about my life and the world and all sorts of things. And then of all places, Penang in Malaya, I had a spiritual awakening, which was a bizarre thing. I won't go into it too much, but I teamed up with a number of people who were going to a centre which I thought was a shopping centre. It turned out to be a centre for a Japanese healing rite called Makikari. But actually it sort of it turned a switch in me, and I picked up a book and I read it, and it brought everything back up again, the whole kind of God thing back up again. And then the next thing happened was when I was in Australia, and I met a guy in Cairns, of all places, and I got on with him really well, and we were staying in the same hostel, and we went out for a meal and had a good time, and then the next morning he left. And I thought to myself after that, it's a shame, we were getting on really well there, never mind. 10 days later, I was in Brisbane on a bus, and he walked past on the pavement, and so I shouted to him, nipped out the bus, and we started talking, and we had 3 intense days together. He was a Christian, he wasn't a Catholic, he was I'm not sure what denomination, it was some Protestant evangelical religion, I'm not sure. But he was a really good guy. He was an angel to me, actually, because I sort of spilled out where I was and wanted I wasn't sure what to do, and he kind of just gently held that and got me back into the Christian faith and took me back to a church, and which I hadn't been in for 12 years. It was an Anglican church, but I was kind of afraid of going back into church, and so he took me in there, and it made a huge difference. And then he went on his way. He'd done his work, and as I say, I never know who he was. Well, I know his name was Chris, but I tried to contact him afterwards, but it just didn't work. I didn't find out where. It seemed to be a dead end. So he come in and done his work. So next thing was when I was in Sydney in Australia, I went into the cathedral, made my confession, and resolved to come back to practicing faith in a kind of normal, conventional way. And so that was the start. But it wasn't the start of my vocation. I'd kind of started a process, and I was still trying to understand my faith and what it meant to me. I think at that stage it was just a sense of having a relationship with God, feeling I was kind of saved in some sort of way. I wouldn't have known what that really meant. And I was content with that. And when I came back to this country, I said, all right, I've got to make a change. I'll train as a computer programmer. And I signed up for a HND course at Brighton University, of all places. And did the first year at Worthing. My parents lived there, and that that went well. The second year I came to Brighton, lived in Brighton, and even though I was reconnecting with my faith and starting to understand things a bit more, it was a pretty dark time for me because, as I say, I was 30 or 30 plus then, and everyone else in my life, my friends, were all getting married, were all getting good jobs, that sort of thing. And I seemed to be going backwards, and I felt quite lonely, quite isolated on my own, and I started to kind of feel sorry for myself, drinking too much, and sort of missing out on sort of lectures and that sort of thing, and or starting to, and I reached a crisis point where I thought I'm actually getting worse rather than getting better, and but it made me resolve that I had to get my life in order. I had to kind of sort myself out in that sense, and admit my failings, and ask for God to come into my life, and that's exactly what happened. When I was that evening, I went to my room, went to bed, and I was awake because my mind was turning and churning over and everything else, and I suddenly became aware of a figure in the room, and I realised that the figure, it was at the foot of my bed, that figure that I was looking at was actually me, which is a weird thing, but that was it. And then it didn't scare me at all, and then this figure started to move a bit closer, and it got to the point where there was eye contact. So I thought, oh no, this is going to be a moment of judgment, and I was quite worried. But to my surprise, it was the exact opposite. What happened was a feeling of complete compassion came into me, and then very slowly this figure just moved into me and became part of me. And from feeling right down low and quite wretched in myself, I suddenly felt filled with joy and filled with the Spirit, really, and a complete sort of change. And what it seemed to me was the fact that at some level in my in earlier life, I'd lost a connection to my true self. That makes sense. And by sort of facing that in an honest way, I somehow managed to reconnect with that. And the other thing it taught me is that I have a physical self, but I actually have a real self, a true self, which is not physical, but is probably more real than my real self, than my physical self. Call that your soul or your spirit or whatever, and that's the most important part about me. And the most important thing in life is to be in connection with that, at one with that, as that experience made me feel, and to hold on to that connection and to never lose myself again, however that might be. And I resolved then and there that evening that would be my primary aim in life, because through that connection, that is how God is present to me. God is created me as this person, to be this person, and the way that I can live that out is to be truly at one with that person, myself. And if I can do that, then everything else will fall into place. I don't actually have to worry about it because God is actually present and working through it. And that made complete sense to me then, and it does now as well. And it made me I said, well, how do you do that? How do you do that? And it must be about prayer, a deep sense of prayer, or meditation. And so the next morning, that was my so everything else was put on hold, and I looked for meditation, and had quite a journey trying to find that. We'll go into that. But I found I was put in contact with the Christian Meditation Centre community, and I contacted them, and they had a group in Brighton where I learned to meditate. They taught me how to meditate. And when I heard how they did that, it just sounded, it was so simple and yet so profound. And I just, yes, that's it. That's what I'm looking for. And so I started meditating and have done to this day, on a regular daily basis. And I found that my life kind of came back together. Everything just focused on that work, and that was it really. And I finished my course. I was about 6 months later, past merit or whatever it was. It was quite good. So I was happy with that. But my priority was still meditation. So on the day after I finished at Brighton Uni, I said, right, I'm going to look at meditation. So I took the train, went up to London, to the Meditation Centre community, which was in Kensington then, and knocked on the door, and a woman answered. And she was the director of the centre, and unbeknownst to me, the day before, somebody was leaving them. They had a community of about 4 people living there. Somebody announced they were leaving, and they asked if anybody would like to join them. And she thought I was responding to that, but I wasn't, because I'd never heard of it. So, but we got on very well, and so she asked me to join them, and for a year. So I thought, why not? I've just finished my course. I haven't got a job. I was actually going to transfer to another degree course from the HND course, but I thought I can put that on hold. And so that's what I did. And I found when I joined them after 2 or 3 weeks, I just felt an amazing sense of peace, and I'm in exactly the right place here. Just know it. It was a wonderful year. And I managed to deepen my meditation. And about 2 or 3 months into it, one of the other residents there said to me, have you ever considered becoming a monk? And I always tell students at Worth it, I laughed in this person's face, and I said, why on earth would I do that? It wasn't on my plan at all. And but then I thought, this whole thing is crazy. Perhaps I should become a monk. I didn't feel very qualified. I didn't feel I would have the attributes necessary, and doubted. Had a few doubts, but I thought, well, I'll investigate it, and so that's what I did. And cut a long short, at the end of that year, I joined Worth, and I went into the novitiate. And I thought, well, I thought I should go back and get a job, but if I'm going to do this monk thing, this is the time to do it. So I thought, well, I'll try it and see what happens. And I often tell people this, it was a stage of my life, and it doesn't really stop really, but of feeling that it's almost like being on an escalator, And I was just standing there and just moving forward, and doors were opening, just going through and just trusting. That's kind of what it felt like to me. And so with that same spirit, I joined Worth. And within 2 weeks of joining that, or less, I had exactly the same feeling that I'd had with the meditation community, that I was in exactly the right place. I felt, this place prioritises prayer, and that's the most important thing. Get the prayer right, and everything else slots into place, and I'm all right. And I suppose I was a bit worried about sort of what I actually do and stuff like that. But I thought, no, just put that aside. I didn't particularly want to work in, I always tell people I didn't want to work in a school, and it's one of the reasons why I was a bit doubtful about Worth. But I thought, no, I'll just trust, and if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. Of course, for the next 19 years, I was working in a school. But it was the right thing, because the thing about prayer is it opens you up in different ways, and it's not so much of what you're doing, it's how you're doing things, and how you're reacting and relating to things and people, and just changing as a person. Well, not changing as a person, becoming the person who God actually created you to be. And that means letting go a lot of the fears that you had before, and I had loads of fears about one thing and another. I had realised I was such a fearful person, and it's been, I often think the last 25 years has been about letting go of fears, and when you do that, a transformation slowly starts to happen, and you start to feel a different person, really. You're the same person, but a different thing is happening. And it's this feeling of God is unfolding my life before me, and I'm just standing here witnessing it, obviously participating as well, but in a sense it's not me. It's a wonderful feeling to have.